So really excited about our chat I just had with Sensei Hurtsellers. 15 years of practicing martial arts under him. One of my favorite humans on the planet. He's always so dynamic, always had so many good insights. Today we talked about meditation a little bit. Of course, we talked about martial arts. We talked about the non-for-profit that we kind of collaborated to make happen and all the good that that's done. We talked about discipline, how martial arts has changed, but then kind of gone back. So I love this man. It's an awesome conversation. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Please share this with your friends. I really appreciate it.
Y'all ready for this?
Welcome to the DeVerna podcast, where we talk about business, life, and how to win at both.
So I've had a couple conversations lately with people in gearing towards meditation, and they were asking me about, like, how long have you been practicing meditation? And I was like, well, that's really easy because it's the exact same amount of days that I've done martial arts. Because literally the first day that I ever meditated, I think, in my whole life was the first day that I walked into the dojo and we meditated before class.
Yeah. So
I'm curious at the beginning here with Joe Hurtsellers, Sensei Hurtsellers, but how long have you had martial arts and meditation be tied in together? Was that like all your forever or? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, really it has. It's very interesting because, meditation is foundational to martial arts, always has been. In the karate dojo I was raised in, we meditated every single class. But it was just like in the old days, not many people had very deep understanding of it. It was just kind of the thing that you just do, like you just do it. Like sometimes religion, that's what we do. But
for sure.
There's not an in-depth of practice. And what really opened the door for me was a martial art teacher in Detroit, Berkeley, and Sifu Robert Brown. And he was the one that just opened my eyes that meditation was not just something that you do, but it was something that affected your practice, and not only affected your practice, then it is a little bit like vitamin C. It just makes everything a little bit better.
Yeah. So how long would it have been ago that you met him? Man, not to put you on the spot too much, but
I want to say probably about the same. Well, it was a little bit before I met you, I think. Yeah. So probably maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 20 years.
Meeting him, even though you've been in martial arts forever, as far as I know, right? Like since you were a teenager.
Yep. Yeah.
Meeting him changed the way you view martial arts or the way you practice martial arts or the way?
Yeah, I mean, it did. It did on a couple of levels. But basically, one of the things when we opened the dojo and did a remodel, he was so generous and came and brought this beautiful bench, which sits up in the front of the dojo. And you walk up to the front of the bench and there's a little inscription on it that he had engraved. And it says, "Good martial arts taught well is enough." And I guess what was going on at that time, and it was pretty much industry-wide, I'd become kind of a voice in the industry. I'd gone to a lot of big events and became a board member for a large martial arts association. And there was all this stuff that people were doing, and all of it was well-intentioned. It was a wonderful organization, but it was all about what are we going to do to create better student retention, and what kind of, are we going to have social events, and are we going to do all these other things that you can find anywhere, right? You can find them in a social club or a boating club or a golf club or a country club. But what Sifu's biggest thing was, and it's just a wonderful contribution, was you don't need really any of those things if your martial arts is great and real, because that's what brings the people. And so then that led to this idea that, well, this isn't just a physical thing that we're doing. Meditation is so important. And then he began to articulate how meditation then affects the way you focus. And the way you focus is what you're drawing to yourself. And so literally you can begin to create your own life by learning to meditate.
Wow. That's pretty deep. That's pretty deep. So I think when I, at the very beginning of learning to meditate and learning in that class, which kind of caught me off guard, as I remember, because I didn't know that was, I was thinking of martial arts the way probably most people think of martial arts. So I was going in there, and then we start with this focus on the breath, the inhalation, the exchange, the exhalation. There's nowhere more important to be, nothing more important that needs to be done. Be here now. And then I remember you explaining like the process of like and that wasn't necessarily in the first class, but there's going to be times when you hear something and you think of something and you go over here, and then your only responsibility really is just to come back to that breath.
Yeah.
And so I think people are really critical of themselves on meditation. They're critical as well in martial arts, but they're very critical on the meditation. But it's just like your practice of martial arts, your practice of meditation. It's just practice.
It's practice.
Right?
That's right.
It's all just a process of that.
That's right. And it's not, meditation is not a process of self-improvement or self-development. And those are wonderful things. Of course, the practice of martial arts is really self-development, and we're getting stronger, we're getting faster, we're getting all those kinds of things. But what meditation is at its core, the way that I teach it, is that it's the stilling of the mind. Because when you stop all thought, you stop all negative beliefs. And when you stop negative beliefs, you become more of that person that you were when you were 4 years old and you didn't have any of those negative beliefs. See, the problem is what's going on right now. There's a great Indian philosopher named Krishnamurti. He's very poetic, the things that he wrote. But one of the things he used to always say is the present and the past are always dead. And the present is dead because it's like the gum that you've chewed all of the flavor out of. Your present moment is nothing more than the decisions that you've made that are now manifesting, okay? So here's a funny little story. I was thinking about this the other day. So when I was a kid, I was like in 5th grade or something, and we went to this little tiny Christian school. And the report card day comes out. And in those days, they would pass the report cards out to you, and it would be in an envelope.
Yeah.
And there's this little kid, 5th grader, sitting right beside me. It's Christian school. He puts it down on his desk, he folds his hands up, and he starts praying. And the teacher says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm praying for good grades," right? And my point is that most people live their lives that way. They've done the activity, they've done the thinking, they've done the focusing, and now the result is right in their face. And then they want some higher power or some physical activity to fix the result of what they just did.
Right.
So what meditation does is allows you to get out ahead of it. So what happens is you stop your thinking, and when you stop your thinking, all that negative garbage that's in your mind starts to become visible. Mm-hmm. And then you've also strengthened your mind so that you can choose to place it where you want and hold it there for longer periods of time. Because at this very moment, we are creating our futures. And meditation teaches you what you're doing at this very moment so that you have given back the dignity of choice. You can choose what to think when you've disciplined your mind.
Yeah. I think like the tie-in that I never saw, or I didn't see early, but I've seen lately, the tie-in between meditation and martial arts. Like there's a mental and physical thing that is, in my opinion, is exactly the same, but in two very different, and that's your response.
Yeah.
So somebody says something and you can like, it's kind of, you see it, it's like there. If it was in physical form, it's here. And then you do what you're going to do with it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same thing, very much the same thing with martial arts. Like your partner does something, or opponent, some would say, and they do something, and your response. So you can, like, I think a very easy response is just to move out of the way. Right. So like in that case, somebody says something negative about you and you just are like, I don't accept that. Like I'm sidestepping that.
Yeah. And
so I think there's such a way deeper assessment of me 15 years into martial arts, that tie in, that I definitely, for at least the first 10 years, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Like I liked it. I appreciated all the parts. I think, other parts of the meditation practice are super it's super magical. But now where it used to be such a badge to say I can meditate for this long, now it's like, well, I think it's pretty cool that I can meditate sometimes for 90 seconds and get pretty far in 90 seconds.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not right. And it's not not a matter of measurement. It's just a matter of enjoyment. It's a matter of, am I feeling a sense of a raised vibration when I do this? Am I getting that result? And am I seeing it affect the way that I behave in my everyday life? And it usually does.
Yeah. It absolutely usually does. I think it has a lot to do with attitude too. Mm-hmm. I think when I walked into martial arts the first couple times, it just felt different. Like it felt different in two big ways. Quality of people seemed very high. And then like I was a person who was raised going to church multiple times a week. And so it felt on some level, because at the end of an awful lot of the classes, you would give a little talk. And that talk would be, I don't know if, I'm curious kind of if that's a talk that you have always teed up, or if it's just like, I'm going to wait and see at the end of class and see what direction this takes, or, you know, but it always feels to me, almost always feels to me like if you've ever gone to church and you felt like the pastor or priest was speaking to you, I felt like I was always at that point, like almost the only person in the room.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden everybody else is gone and I'm just sitting there listening, hearing what I need to hear from your lips to my ears. Yeah. And I found that to be super interesting and maybe selfish, but
right.
Whatever it is, it was my reality and still is my reality.
Right.
You know?
So a way to look at this, and I've kind of been teaching this lately, but so there's this thing called reception. Like what are we receiving? Like what's coming in? Or another way to say it that may be a little easier is what am I able to hear? What am I open to? Mm-hmm. And so the natural question that people ask is, you know, how do you tune your reception modes so that you're receiving the best stuff? Whether you want to have more fitness, you want more money in your life, you want better relationships. How do you tune to that frequency so that you can get the insights and the ideas that you need to move ahead? And what people don't realize is what you are broadcasting is exactly what you're receiving. So when a fantastic student like you comes into a room and I say something and you go, wow, that was just what I needed. That's because you were broadcasting that. And then it was coming back out of me. And there was this loop that was going on between the two of us. And this happens all the time. This happens even in this conversation, but it happens everywhere we go. Yeah. What I'm putting out is what the universe is delivering back every single time. So the next time you're in class and I say something that's brilliant, just give yourself a big pat on the back because it's all you. It's not me.
That's awesome. Yeah. I feel like all these conversations are kind of like that. Like when you're just a little more dialed in with certain people, it just is easier. And there's the give and take of a good dance, you know, that it kind of moves back and forth like that. And I think, I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I think most people that have known me have heard about you. And I think it's an interesting how many people, when you talk about martial arts, like all the things that people think about martial arts people, and then when they actually meet the martial arts people, they realize how different it is from what, like martial arts, generally they think they're really tough, which let's face it, they are tougher than usual, but they're also generally the kindest person and one of the most unlikely people for you to see get in a fight.
That's right.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. So I think that's an interesting facet. I mean, how many fights have you been in the last 20 years?
None.
Yeah, me either. So, and I think it's funny. I was just in California a few days ago and people, when they know you do martial arts, they just like, to be honest with you, this trip, it was an awesome trip with awesome people. Almost none of them knew. They wouldn't shut up about it. Every time they were with me, that's what they wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Which I love talking about martial arts, but it's like, shouldn't we be, I feel like there's 7 people here. We're only talking about my martial arts. Like, I feel kind of like, hey, let's talk about some other stuff.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that people are attracted to.
Yeah.
And fascinated by. Have you seen, like, where would you put when you started practicing, or in any middle phase, to how popular martial arts is then versus now?
So that's a great question. So it's kind of interesting, because when I started in the 1970s, martial arts was at a big peak of interest, right? Because you had Enter the Dragon in the theaters, you had High Karate Cologne, right? You had James Bond movies where they would do a few little things, and it was just the coolest thing that everybody. Kung Fu was the TV series with Dan Carradine.
Awesome.
Everybody wanted it, but there was no supply. Most towns had one dojo. And so it was just a really very odd time. And if you could, sometimes in those days, it was even hard. They would, oh no, we're not open. We're not taking students right now, right? Mm-hmm. Many dojos didn't accept kids. Now kids are the majority of, the business model of most dojos are kids, right? But they didn't accept kids. They didn't make uniforms in kids' sizes back then. Mm-hmm. So you find some Japanese for little Japanese people, then you kind of use the smallest one that you could possibly get if you were small enough. But so there was that. Now that was neat from the standpoint that it was really special to be part of a dojo, right? And it also gave the teachers, there was like the sword with two sides, right? The one side was that gave that teacher the autonomy to say, this is what we're going to do. This is the standard, and that's it, because there was no business pressure. There was none of that. There was an endless supply of people that wanted to join. On the other side, that also allowed people to maybe be a little bit more aggressive than what they probably should have been. They didn't understand teaching principles. Remember, a lot of the early martial arts people came in Japan or Korea or other places, and they learned in the military when it was there for a specific purpose. They learned a specific way of thinking, and they also took a lot of things that were really non-martial art traditions, that were really military traditions, and brought them into the martial arts world, so that when the world kind of changed, some of those guys got left behind a little bit. Mm-hmm. Now, I'll be real brief with this, but I would just say, but now today we have the explosion of knowledge, and the greatest athletes in the world, I think, are probably martial artists at this point.
Agreed.
And there's knowledge, and there's sharing, and everything's going in all kinds of different directions. And the best part of it all is now the era of professionalism has entered into martial arts. So a good dojo is like, going into a good golf club, in that there's professional standards. There's a way that people address one another. It's really the essence of what the art was always designed to be. It's just that we went through a little rough stage in the 1970s and 80s. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's neat to see so many people, and at our dojo, like it's shocking, because the way that when I was on the outside looking in originally, so go back to 20 years ago, it felt like, oh, I'm not a kid anymore. I missed my chance. And growing up in Pemberville, it was a town where we didn't have a dojo. I don't even know where the closest dojo would have been. Like, I don't know if Bowling Green had a dojo, if I would have come to Toledo to go to, I don't really have any idea, but I know I didn't have any exposure to it. And I know one friend that did, and he was 2 grades below me, and I wasn't really friends with him. I just knew. So wherever his family took him to, I suppose, was maybe the closest place, but it wasn't super local to us. Like, they sought that out. And so what now, I don't know the balance of kids to adults, but there's a balance of kids to adults.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of kids, and there's an awful lot of adults.
Yep.
And, we were talking to a friend today, because every time we get together, oh, how do you know? Oh, okay, well, and they're like, oh my God, I want to get in there.
Yeah.
Like, it happens every time I talk about martial arts. I want to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the draw. And I think it's neat. What do you think people are looking for, that they're looking for that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, martial arts, it's the most wonderful thing in the world.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to feel secure. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to feel strong. Everybody wants to feel independent. Everybody wants to be able to change their body in a way and get their body to do things that they didn't think that they could do before. And what happens, and you kind of touched on this before, but why martial arts people, for the most part, are some of the most down-to-earth, kind of comfortable, friendly people is that what happens is when you walk into a room and you feel this pride in what you've been able to do for yourself, it can't help but affect the way you deal with other people. In the past, when somebody would say something to you and you'd be really offended by it, you don't care anymore. It's just not that big of a deal anymore.
It's just
because what you've done is you've expanded your personal universe to be so big that little fly that used to really bother you just kind of gets swallowed up in the bigness of who you've become. And I think martial arts can do that for people. And of course, then when parents start to realize the value of what that can do for children, when a child, I still believe to this day, are the most self-esteem deprived society in the history of the world. Everything is about follow this rule, follow that rule. You're not good enough. You got to make the grade. You've got to do better. You've got to do this. You've got to do that, the other thing. And what martial arts does for people is it gives them that self-esteem. And it gives them something that they can do at their own speed, on their own level, at their own time, and they can be successful. And we have kids that come in that struggle in other sports because it's kind of many sports. It's sometimes the survival of the fittest. It's not designed to be that way, but somebody's got to score the goal.
Right.
And if Johnny can't kick the ball as well as the other kids, then the coach is just naturally not going to want to put him in. But that never happens in martial arts.
Yeah.
Never. And some of those kids, and it just breaks my heart when it happens, but I'm also very proud of it. Some of those kids that never got any playing time, that never participated in any sports, they're in my program for 2 or 3 years, or another good martial art program, and they get all that strength and all that power, and then they try out soccer or basketball or something like that, and then sometimes we lose them to them. But we're kind of proud to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very meaningful as a child for them to have those certain tools and confidence and that stuff. And I also think it's extremely, although it gives you those same things, I think the part that the kids are set up for is these open relationships with their friends at school. Yeah. The adults oftentimes don't have. Like, you look around and you might not see anybody else where you work, or you might have a job where you're not with people so much at work. So there's this community thing that happens, which is one of the other parts. I don't think anybody joins martial arts for that.
Right.
But they get it.
Get it.
Like, I didn't join martial arts for that. I got it. Like, a couple of my best friends I'll ever have. I didn't join martial arts for meditation, but I got it. There's all these other facets. I joined martial arts never thinking I would be doing it for 15 years.
Right. I
was like a recovering fat guy who wanted to have something to kind of help me be held accountable.
Yeah.
So I got my intentions were like this big, and now you get all these things, and we're able to do so much. And all the adult relationships, it's very different, but it's a great place to have them.
Yeah.
A couple very dear friends that, are going to be my friends forever, but I'm going to be practicing martial arts, I think. I mean, my intentions are truly forever.
Yeah.
That's really my agenda. My grandpa's 97. So, and I'm most like him. So I think the likelihood, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
that's
we
cool.
got a long time.
Yeah, that's cool.
I have.
And you're having fun. So
I'm having fun.
Why not? Why not?
and another thing that I think with martial arts that is really cool, and then I'll shut up for a minute and go back to you talking, your profoundness. But I think that we've gotten soft.
Yeah.
As a society. And I'm guilty with my kids, right? And so I think having a place, truthfully, depending upon how hard you're going in that class, it's probably the hardest part of your day.
Yeah.
The most rewarding, but the hardest part of your day. So once you get through that, all the rest of the day, what's going to be hard after facing off with someone, in a physical situation where you're nervous and you're anxious and somebody's shouting out orders a little bit, and you're doing those orders, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on a physical level, one of the great things is just when we're talking about the workout part, it's a self-adjusting workout, right?
Right.
So if you're hitting a pad, right? And once you get to a certain, we always have to tell our newbies, please don't hit so hard. You got to, kind of build up to it and so on.
Sure.
But once you get to a certain level of conditioning, I say, well, how hard are you going to hit the pad? And the answer is as hard as I can. If I'm thinking about self-defense, I'm going to hit as hard as I can. Well, what happens when that muscle gets stronger? What happens when those joints get stronger? What happens when your body mechanics get stronger and you can hit harder? How hard are you going to hit then? As hard as I can. So I know people that'll do a workout, they'll do a video or something. They do that video every day, and it's so good, it's so good. It's after 3 or 4 weeks, if they just put a monitor on their wrist, they're not getting the same workout they were getting.
Right.
But I'm telling you, you can be doing it for 15 years, you can be doing it for 3 years, you can do it for 1 year. But what happens is every single workout will hit you just like those early workouts do.
For sure.
Because you're doing everything as best you can. It's just the way it works.
Yeah, we had recently, so we're going to talk a little bit about testing. I think that's a fun thing to talk about because I think it's an important part of martial arts. And we recently had testing, and when we were like with the COVID situation, my last test was one person. It was just me, which I'm glad I went through that, but I don't really need to do that again. Like I'd be fine if that never has to happen again. But so we had one person, and then we had several people helping accommodate that. And we would do some sparring and some rolling and all those things. But our most recent testing session where I just helped, we had, I think, 12 people testing. Yeah. Which is very interesting because you've got all that energy and all these different people and then people there to help. And I think it's a lot of fun from the outside, but on the inside, you're like, you have all these kind of demands and these expectations, physical expectations and mental expectations. And that's very intentional, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I equate testing to, you can go for a jog, you can go for a run. It's a wonderful activity. I enjoy it myself. Mm-hmm. But if you have a 5K coming up or a 10K, it's going to change the way you run.
Right.
And that changes everything. So once you start to measure it a little bit, and that's what it does for people, it gives them this goal and this sort of unification. And the other thing that it does that's really valuable too is there's pieces of the curriculum. Guys that like to kick, all they want to do is kick. People who want to punch, all they want to do is punch. People who like jujitsu, they don't want to strike. They want to do jujitsu. Right. And if you're going to be tested over each one of those things, you got to work on them all.
Yeah.
And the great thing about that is sometimes some of those things that you think you suck at, right? Those become your favorite things.
Yes. Like I remember, just for myself, 2 things. Like I remember so when you're testing, you get 3 strikes. And if you get a third, which means you did something incorrectly or you didn't know something or wherever it was. And I remember getting a strike on my jab.
That was a long time ago. But
it was a long time ago. And I remember that and going, oh my gosh, I've been practicing martial arts for a year or whatever it was, and I don't know how to throw a jab.
Right.
Like because I wasn't extending. And then I remember the other thing that I thought was a weakness. It was my hook, and I just was like, I was watching Dr. Tom do a hook, and he does a hook different than almost everyone else in the class.
Yeah.
Like he just does a different style. Like he brings this, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to watch his hook and watch his hook and practice his hook and practice his hook and practice. And mine doesn't look like his, I assure you, but now it may be one of the best tools in my belt.
Yeah.
So over this evolution, and then we didn't test, but we were in the testing process, and just being in a group with 12 people. Now there's 2 extras, Dr. Tom and myself. So there's 14, and we're just going as hard as you can because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You're right. It doesn't matter. Like I know my heart. I know where my heart rate was. Like I don't know. I wasn't measuring it. I know.
Right.
Because you can't go much harder than I was going.
Yeah.
And so it's such a neat thing.
Yeah. And to have, of course, you had that one day you described where you were by yourself, but when you're testing with a group of people, to go through those experiences with other people,
it's awesome.
Even those people they're people that you train with, that you're always friendly with. Some of them will become close friends, some not. But at the end of that test, in a way, everybody's close friends.
Yeah.
Everybody. It's like being in the foxhole together.
Well, and you're rooting for those other people. Because it's definitely a society of that.
Yeah.
Like it's definitely not it's definitely not a group where I'm pushing you down for me to go up.
Yeah.
Excuse me there. Yeah. No, I'm good. Yeah. So it's interesting. I find that. So let's talk about why the testing's so hard. Like, because there's a lot of places that do martial arts, and you know for a fact what the first question I get.
Right.
So you've practiced 15 years. How long have you been a black belt?
Right.
Well, here's the thing, not a black belt. So you must be lousy at martial arts if you're not a black belt.
Right.
15 years.
Because my 5-year-old is a 3rd-degree black belt, right?
Right. Yeah, my 7-year, it's interesting because my nephew's 7 and he's a black belt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you're not. So the 7-year-old, in their mind, legitimately, maybe,
right,
they think their 7-year-old nephew can beat me up.
Right.
Which, is funny. but let's speak to that, because I think that is, like, it's so unique.
Yeah.
And I've seen it only in 2 places, and I think for us not to speak to that is it would be a mistake.
Yeah. So what it comes down to, this is not to devalue any of those folks that do that.
Right.
I've seen those kinds of programs change children's lives, and I think it's wonderful.
It's awesome.
And I've just encouraged that. As much martial arts is good for people, period, right? So it's really just a matter of setting whatever the standard that you've set, and then giving people an opportunity to rise to that. But what I've noticed is you don't have to make the standard so difficult that no one can ever achieve it or anything like that. That's not the matter. It's just like, I guess the analogy of a race is a pretty good one. I mean, the benefit for training for a 5K is significantly higher than if you're training for a 1K.
Right.
And if you're training for a 10K, that's a whole different level. And if you run in a marathon, I know you've done that.
Yeah.
If you run in a marathon, that's a whole different animal. So it's just a matter of setting that standard to allow somebody. Now, we say that martial arts is a way of life, and for some people it is. Obviously, for you it is, and for me it is, and others. But I just wanted to supply something that gave somebody fodder for their life, so that they always have something they're working towards. We don't ever want to run in a situation where you end up with a certain number of students and they kind of feel like, okay, that's it. There's nothing that I'm working towards anymore. I think what we've done is we've created this curriculum that's very complete, and there's a lot in that curriculum. And 1, it takes that long, and 2, it's a valuable thing, because what it does is it raises the standard of everyone.
Yeah, I think it's unique, and I think it's special.
Yeah.
I think that, so I'm not confident on how many black belts you've given out. I know we currently only have 2.
Yeah.
And we have 1 person who's getting, I would assume, fairly close in that range.
Yep.
And then you've got a couple other behind him.
Yeah.
But there's not like this, like, it really is a very, very small number of people out of the hundreds and then thousands of people that start to do martial arts with you.
Well, I mean, the goal of the whole thing is, I remember when I tested for black belt, and we finished the test, and there's so much that went into it. I can't even, I could talk forever about the months and years leading to this moment. And then we go through the test, and there were times during that test when I literally didn't know if I was awake or not. Like, I was at that level, like when you're running a marathon and you're like, I don't know am I still running? I don't know.
Right.
But I think I am, but I'm not sure, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then we get to the end, and then in those days there was this meeting where they would all go back, all the people that were testing were all these high-ranking black belts. And they go back into the office, and you're waiting. And then you have the thought, I don't care if I passed or not. Why would I care? I'm not here for that.
Right.
And as it turned out, I tested with 4 others. 3 passed, 1 did not. But it really didn't matter. And then when you get to that point where nobody can take nobody can take your rank away from you. That's, I think, martial arts when it's doing the best thing it can for you.
Yeah. It's pretty special.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really is the journey. I remember being with a couple of my martial arts friends and realizing that I was a brown belt, brown sash, whatever, some people, the verbiage is a little different, and going, how in the world am I this? Like, I've seen some good martial artists, and I didn't feel like I was one of them, you know? And so it's interesting, like you've done all these things, but yet the martial arts is such a massive thing. And I got introduced to jiu-jitsu from watching our black belts. Like, so when you gave out the first 2 black belts that I've ever seen given out, I watched them proceed to line up on either side of the dojo. And this wasn't the testing part. They had already done the testing part, I believe.
Yeah.
And this was just like the display.
Yeah. It's really a celebration, really.
A celebration, the beauty of what.
Yeah.
And you said, Stephen, go this way. Mr. Pagel, go this way. And then there's a line of everyone there. I believe there were 42 people.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, 41 or 42 people. And they proceeded to roll, which means to grapple, which with each of these 42 people, and spar with each of these 42 people. So I'm very comfortable sparring with, I don't know, 42 people seems like a lot, but very comfortable sparring. But when I went to the ground, even for my minute and a half or 2 minutes or whatever I did with those guys, I was like, dude, you're not ready. Like, you have to do some work to deserve what these guys definitely deserve. Like, these guys are in a class, several classes above me at that point that I felt.
Yeah.
And so it introduced me to a whole new part of martial arts because I had to. Yeah. Because I don't know that I would have been ever ready to do that without that. Yeah. And so it's really, and it's so fascinating how big martial arts is and all the different parts and pieces to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool.
And stuff. So if you go back into your, like highlight reel, like this is kind of putting you on the spot, but I know you're really good on the spot. But when I tell you that you're constantly amazing people with your talks and presenting some of those and the 5 ways, which we can go into or not, but I'm just thinking of like how emotional, how spiritual and physical, and how it brings all those things together. And when we're getting some of the spiritual stuff from you, like you wouldn't expect that from the dojo. Like, how has that been part of what you've done forever, or was that an influence from somewhere?
Well, definitely from the earliest days, I was always fascinated. Always. Very first karate book I had, it's out of print now. It was a big, thick book. Well, actually, that's not true. I had another one that was by the same author, Masutatsu Yama, Vital Karate, and then this big volume called This is Karate. And back in those days, there weren't very many martial arts books and publishing. It's all different today. And these were beautiful books. But Oyama talked about meditation right from day one. I was always very interested in that. I always kind of viewed like the practice of martial arts as one thing, and then this sort of spiritual interest as another thing. And I think over time, what I've come to realize, and certainly what I teach, is that there's really no separation between the physical and the spiritual. These are one and the same. It is your ability to place your mind where you want to go and hold it there long enough that gives you results. And that result could be firing a reverse punch or doing a guillotine or something like that. Or that result could be in creating a better relationship for you and your family. So all of those things are connected. And so I've always believed that. I've studied that. I studied Alan Watts, as a kid. I studied Krishnamurti, I mentioned before. Studied some of Yogananda's work. And little by little, Esther Hicks has probably been the biggest influence in my life, without a doubt. Wow. And so I've done all of that work, and to wake up one day and realize that the two things that I love the most, which is martial arts and which is the spiritual work, are the same thing.
It's crazy.
It's like I woke up and realized I had won the lottery, and I had the ticket, and it was buried in my hip pack somewhere, and I just didn't check it. And when I realized that, life started to get really good.
Yeah. Well, when you're like, hey, these are my people, and they're not some are martial arts people and some aren't martial arts people. Yeah. But it all pertains to my martial arts practice. Yeah. That's a home run. That's pretty cool. So let's talk about something that we kind of started together a few years ago, and I think it's done a lot of good for a lot of people. And I have a hard time not having that come up while we're here, because I think it's pretty cool. So a long time ago, we had a coffee or a beer or something, we talked about the reason that more people don't do martial arts in Toledo, and it's no longer in the scope of just Toledo anymore, but just the United States, right?
Yeah.
Is money.
Yeah.
And so when the transmission in the car goes out, somebody loses their job, insert story here.
Yeah.
Martial arts, just like, hey, we can't afford to do martial arts.
Yeah.
So historically, that would mean they would come to you and say, hey, Bob lost his job, so Jimmy and Sally aren't going to be able to do martial arts anymore. And you would probably say, well, just keep them, bringing them, and I'll,
yeah,
we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And so we created a non-for-profit, an official 501c3 that is able to supplement scholarships for basically a lot of kids, some adults, people that otherwise wouldn't be able to do martial arts.
Yeah.
So that's been a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we've given out thousands of scholarships.
Yeah.
And we are now doing it with other schools,
Yeah.
not just locally, but
Yeah.
throughout.
Yeah.
And so I haven't heard of anybody else doing this yet. I want more people to jump on board, but could you give us like your version of a commercial of what that is and was, and anything you can think of with that?
Well, just, it goes back to kind of what we were talking about when I was telling you about that bench that Sifu Brown gifted to our dojo that says great martial arts, good martial arts taught well is enough, right? Mm-hmm. So the commercial model of most martial arts schools is about student engagement, right? And that makes sense. I mean, people need to feel part of community. They need to be part of an organization. So in the commercial model, what will happen is they'll have for kids a movie night, or they'll have a special trip where they go a picnic or things like that. And those are all wonderful things. Great. But what we like is to be focused on martial arts.
Yeah.
So it just makes sense then to do events, and then those events do create that socialization. Plus they bring people that are not in martial arts, that are part of the community, into the mix where they can kind of get to know us, we can get to know them, and proceeds from those events, which create this wonderful atmosphere in our dojo in the first place, then feed right back to the thing that we love, which is helping people with their martial arts so they can grow stronger and be better and get all the benefits that we've been talking about. So look, every school in the country when you have good teachers, and there are many, we love to teach. We love to share the art with people. And, as far as I know, there's no good teacher that when somebody runs out of money is going to say, hey, the doors are closed. All of our careers have been built on helping people. If somebody's using it, I don't care about that. And many people know that about me. So here's the thing. This allows the school to continue to function from a business standpoint and still be able to practice the arts that we love.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty neat because truthfully, the last time in the world that you want to give up martial arts is when you are unemployed.
That's right.
And things aren't going very well.
Yeah. That's when you need it the most.
And that's when you need it the most.
Yeah.
And, something happens where, kids are affected in a lot of different ways, but
yeah,
parents going through a divorce, which often means financial problems. Like we're seeing it from all different aspects, but now to have literally have had, been looked at by the government a few times. We've been doing it for a long time, and they're like, oh, this still deserves the 501c3 label. We're doing everything right. Yeah. Nobody's receiving a salary. Nobody's this is literally all the money's falling right back into the system primarily for these kids to be able to continue to do martial arts or to be introduced to martial arts.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome. And then we have down in Columbus, we have Matt Brown and the Immortal, who just won his most recent UFC fight. Pretty tough at 40 years old. Pretty awesome.
UFC legend, right?
He'll be a Hall of Famer for sure.
Yeah.
And he's an awesome human. And he's also, I remember when visiting his place and we went into his office and we're talking about MAM and the things that MAM does, this non-for-profit. And he's waiting for me to tell him what the downside is. Like people, that's the biggest hesitation is nobody knows how to respond because people don't reach out to give you money without some kind of expectation back.
Yeah.
And martial arts has never really asked me for anything back. Like I give it to it's giving me all this stuff. And
it's asked for you for a lot of sweat.
Yeah,
a lot of
sweat. But I remember we were walking out of his office and we walked past a group that wasn't there when I went into the office, and it was a group of special needs students.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, what's going on here? He's like, oh, that's whatever this group is. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me about that? And he's like, well, you told me you guys do the stuff for the kids. I'm like, well, but, I was like, well, it looks like we need to expand that conversation.
Yeah.
So you get guys like Matt, who was doing that out of the goodness of his heart.
Yeah.
Paying the coaches to do that already. It's such a natural fit for us to be able to like come in. And at some point I know for a fact, like it is implanted and will be like a conversation like this is going to go to the right person. We have Matt Brown. We're going to get lots of Matt Browns. We're going to get an audience with Dana White someday. Like we know that this is going to be something that can blow up and be something across the United States that it's going to be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be a cool way for some of us to have contributed back to the thing we love that's done so well for us.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
pretty cool. So anything else that we should be talking about before I let you go? I appreciate your time always. I know there's this constant evolution of the dojo and the things we're doing. Where would somebody find, because the question I get, we already had it once today. Like somebody sees us together and they're like, two very handsome, bald-headed guys that are in exceptional shape and clearly badasses. Like, how do I get to be a part of that?
Yeah.
And so like literally every time that martial arts comes up, I've always wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Like what's the process for being introduced to that? Because it's not a scary process. Like you've really brought that process down to be something so seamless and easy. It's not going to be, it's simple, not easy. Let me rephrase that.
Well said. Yeah. So, I mean, the easiest thing to get information, about us is, our website, which is ohiomartialarts.com. And we are at the shops at Fallen Timbers. Everything's on that website. People can get information on our schedule. There's our philosophy, like what we do, what's the benefits for people. And then if somebody wants to take that other step and try it out, we do an introductory course, and they can literally just register online, and it's one of the easiest things you'll ever do. So that's certainly the first step. Then I would also say, just going back to what something that you had said earlier, is that if there's anything I wanted to add, I just want to say, you had said earlier that a lot of your people know you. Well, a lot of people listening at home may not know is just about everybody that I know knows this guy, okay? Because your reputation in the financial field is just, you're the Matt Brown of finance, okay?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I appreciate what you've done for me and my family in that regard as well. So.
I really appreciate that. Something that you said just before I wanted to kind of speak to, because it spoke to me, just, hey, make sure you get this out there. So one of the things that when people are introduced to martial arts, they're kind of scared. I think for sure, like the hardest rank to get is a white belt. That's just my opinion. Like I'm still in the practice of going to be a black belt.
Yep.
But I think the hardest rank is the white belt, because walking in that class the first day is clearly, in my opinion, the hardest time.
Yeah.
Like the first time.
Yeah.
So I want to correct what I think is a misnomer. And that is, I don't want to go in there and get put with somebody like you that's been doing this for 20 years and get my butt kicked. And what I want you to know is I'm exactly who you want to be put with.
Yeah.
Like Mark Sears has been practicing martial arts for 20 years, and he's the toughest dude. And the chances of you getting hurt with Mark Sears is zero. Yeah. Like that's part of the beauty, is that they're going to take the person that's never done this before, and they're going to put them not just with any random person. You're literally going to be with a person You know, the Dr. McLaughlin's, you know, the Stevens, the Dans, the Marks. Like, you're going to be put with Mr. Snavely, the folks that are such, like, there's no question what your experience will be after that first class. So if you haven't done it, this is a really not a risky situation. Like, you're getting the absolute best treatment with the best people at the best place. It's pretty awesome. So thanks for all you are.
Thanks. I'm honored.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
DeVerna offers products and services using the following business names: Creative Financial Partners, Insurance and Financial Services, Emeritus Investment Company, LLC, AIC, member FINRA, SIPC, Security Investments, Emeritus Advisory Services, AAS Investment Advisory Services. AIC and AAS are not affiliated with Creative Financial Partners. Products and services are limited to residents of states where the representative is registered. This is not an offer of securities in any jurisdiction, nor is it specifically directed to a resident of any jurisdiction. As with any security request and prospectus from a representative, read it carefully before you invest or send money. A representative will contact you to provide requested information. Representatives of AIC and AAS do not provide legal or tax advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney regarding the situation.
Whew. Thanks for watching.